Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. My name is Dr. Steve Simpson, and I'm a medical doctor by background. But for the last 10 years, I've worked as a mind coach, and I work exclusively with elite performers. But before you think you've joined the wrong channel, I assure you you haven't, because you are an elite performer, even though I've probably never met you before. And the reason that I say that is that I regard all my clients as elite performers, because offhand, I can't think of a single person that I've met professionally that isn't an elite performer. They've all been good at least one thing, and very often more than one thing. And with a little bit of help from me, they've raised their game to at least the next level, and sometimes many levels higher than that. So what have I done to do this? Well, the truth is that I don't actually do very much. And what I certainly do not do is take the credit for the results that my clients get. And some of them get some really good results because they are world champions. But that, again, is not what I've done. You see, what I do is I talk to people. I have a little bit of very simple kit that I sometimes use, but I talk to them in a special way because I'm not really interested in their conscious minds. You see, our brain is like roughly split into two. There's the conscious bit of the mind, which is where you are right now and where a bit of me is right now. And that's all we know about the existence that we lead on this planet. But you see, underneath the conscious mind is a much bigger part of our brain, which is the unconscious, and it's called that for a reason. Not actually could almost be called the unknown part of the brain, because the scientists understand only a fraction of it. But what the scientists would definitely agree with is its massive power. So I have learned techniques that allow me to more easily connect to my unconscious mind. And then my role is just to put my client into a state of mind where they are more able to access their unconscious mind too. And that is when they ignite their potential. It's not me who's igniting it for them. I'm just leading them to that place. And once they find that place, they will never, ever forget it, because that's the way the mind works. And I'm quite sure that in your life, you will have already done some brilliant stuff. And so you've done it at least once. So it is inside you. And that's a common thing that I say to all of my clients. You don't need to worry about not being able to do stuff. You don't need to worry about the things that you don't know, because I can tell you right now, you have all the skills inside you that you need. You just need to perhaps remember or discover where they're hiding. Now, that's kind of like an intro, probably raises a lot more questions than answers, but in this line of work, that's not unusual. In fact, the interesting thing is, and reassuring thing is, that we often don't need to find answers. We just have to do stuff and not worry too much about how we did it. So anyway, I'm going to kick off with a question which comes from Margaret. Thank you, Margaret, for posting a question in advance. Gave me a little time to think about it. Not that I need much time, because actually, when you hear the question, you'll realize I get asked it a lot, but that's because it's an important question. The others of you that are listening in, there should be a little text box somewhere on your screen where you can type a question, and I would welcome you to post your questions during the show, and I'm sure I will find a way of answering them and weaving them in to the subjects that I particularly want to talk about today. And the subjects that I want to talk about today are our thoughts, where they come from, emotions, where they come from, and by knowing some of this stuff, how we can exert a little control over the chaos that's going on in our brain. So, Margaret, here we go. Your question. Is there really such a thing as luck, or do you create luck by doing positive things? Wonderful question. The answer is yes, yes. And you probably want a bit more information from that. So here we go. Is there such a thing as luck? There certainly is. I wouldn't have wasted the last 2.5 years or more of my life. 2.5, yeah, that's about right. If I didn't truly believe that there is such a luck. And of course, it's not so much what I think, whether there is such a thing as luck that matters. It's what does everybody else think? And I went back, in some cases, thousands of years in my research, and I have found that throughout the generations, luck has always fascinated people. And the result of my research is this book, Get Lucky Now, The 7 Secrets of Lucky People. And it's on Amazon for anybody who's interested in buying it. But in this book, the 7 secrets that I talk about, 6 of them are very logical, which is why I can say with a pretty high degree of confidence that anybody who reads that book and carries out the very simple exercises that are there. I never talk about complicated stuff, by the way. Simple is usually best. Just as we might mention soon, less is usually better than more. The problem is that this is counterintuitive for most people, because most people have been brought to believe that the harder they work, the luckier they get. And whilst there's some truth in that, unfortunately, there's a lot in there that just doesn't work like that. So there is such a thing as luck, Margaret. I can pretty much guarantee it. The second part of your question, which is even more interesting, or do you create luck by doing positive things? Well, you create luck by doing stuff, for sure. Whether you create luck by doing positive things, I'm not so sure. I'm a bit different from almost all other mind coaches because I try not to use words like positive or positivity very much. People say, I've heard people on the touchlines of major games shouting to their players, you have to be more positive. Well, I wonder how the players react when they hear something like that. I'm sure they're doing their best to get the ball in the net or whatever sport it is they're playing, and I'm not sure that comments like that are very helpful. I probably wouldn't shout anything during a game at all, but if I was to say anything to a player at halftime or whatever, I would just say, get your head in the right place. And I'd give them some clues as to how to do that. So do you create luck by doing positive things? You certainly do create luck by doing things. And one of the throwaway comments that I have made many times during the course of a year, I will talk to thousands of people one way or another. And the throwaway comment is, if I had to give one bit of advice to anybody, I would say, put yourself in the game, just like that. But to some people, this can have a stunning effect, just that simple statement, put yourself into the game. Because fear is one of our self-limiting beliefs. Well, the trouble is, it's not a self-limiting belief. It's actually a self-limiting truth, because we have this thought, and I'll get onto this in a few minutes, I'm sure, and if we knew that it was a belief, then we would be better off and we could do something about it. But you see, we see these things as truths. If we're frightened of something, or if we think something bad is going to happen, in the physiology of our body, which is influenced, of course, by the mind primarily, our brain, especially our unconscious mind, will find it very difficult to differentiate between this thing that we are considering as a truth, where in fact really it's a hallucination, because it's usually of a future event, and I don't know anybody who can accurately predict the future. If there is such a person, then maybe that is a self-limiting truth, but I don't know anybody who can. So back to thoughts and emotions, because they really are the foundation of all the work that I do with people, and everything that my theories and my beliefs are based upon. You see, because in the work I do, I don't actually have many truths either. But I do know that. I believe that certain stuff works. I know that certain things have worked well in the past on certain clients. But when I go in to sit down with a new client for the first time, I have no idea what is going to happen. And that actually makes it really exciting. When I started, it was also a bit frightening. But you see, I'm not frightened of anything like that now. There are very few things that I'm frightened about now, because I've realized over the years that most things that we worry about aren't worth worrying about. So here we go. This is a prop that I found particularly useful in demonstrating this part of my talk. And as you can probably see, there's all these gold and silver things flying around within this orb. And I want you to take a small leap of imagination and imagine that this is your brain. If you need reminding what a brain is, I actually have a fresh specimen here. Here it is. Anatomically, it's not very helpful to me. It looks like a load of squiggly lines. But when you only pay $1 for it, you're not going to get a lot of detail. So someday I'm going to find a very good model of the brain that I can use on these programs. But that, as I said earlier, simple is sometimes best. That's about as complicated as my neuroanatomy goes. And back to the sparkly things going round and round in circles, hypnotizing me as I speak. And that's no bad thing, because you see, if we are slightly hypnotized, that means we're connected to the unconscious mind, which is why hypnosis used correctly can be a very powerful tool. And just in case you don't really know what hypnosis is, or you've never been hypnotized, it doesn't have very much to do with swinging clocks on the end of a chain. It doesn't even have very much to do with telling people to close their eyes and think about certain things. Hypnosis is around all of us in very subtle ways. The masters of hypnosis, they don't call themselves that. They call themselves creative geniuses working in the advertising industry. They work in other industries as well, and they probably don't even know that they're hypnotists themselves. But the way they construct their advertisements, the words that they use, the imagery they use, the emotions that they tickle, the way they appeal to our desires and to our fears. Fear has always been a great way to advertise stuff, strangely enough. They are indeed experts at it. So, all the sparkly things going round and round and round, what are they? Well, they are my thoughts. Sorry, they are your thoughts. They are our thoughts. And there's a lot of them. You can't count how many there are, can you? In our brain, if all of these are the thoughts in our brain, the scientists tell us that in one day we have 70,000. That's a lot of thinking. Now, I have no idea how they came to this number, but my guess, and it's only a guess, I think we have a lot more than that. The same scientists say we can only think of 6 things at a time. And they're right, I guess. I don't know whether they mean 7 things consciously or 7 things unconsciously. Because my guess, again, in the unconscious mind is that we will be thinking of way more than 7 things at a time. And when we have a thought in our unconscious mind, it takes about 7 seconds before we perceive it as a thought in our conscious mind, and we start to do something with it in the higher layers of our brain. Now, why have I spent quite a few minutes talking about all of these thoughts going round and round? And the point I'm trying to make is that, as you can see, there's a little bit of peace and tranquility exerting itself in here. Because if I keep my hands still, the little thoughts are all starting to settle down on the bottom. And I'm not the only person who says that the best thoughts come from a quiet mind, or as one particular poet or philosopher said, it's only in a still mind that the truth can speak. And that is why I mentioned earlier that less is more. And when I work with people, a lot of my work to do is helping them to think less. Have you ever heard the expression, this person's overthinking the problem. Well, there's something about us, there's something about our genes and our upbringing that has made us superb at overthinking, because frankly, our brains are not designed for that. Our brains have evolved over at least 1 million years, maybe even longer. And the thoughts that we have in them are sometimes not as sophisticated as we might like to think, because a lot of these thoughts, they come from the deepest, oldest layers of the brain. I met a PhD doctor in evolutionary human neuroanatomy, and we had a very great discussion over coffee when she was sharing some of our views. The result of our conversation was that she gave me the mother of all headaches, and she used words that I'd never heard of, and I certainly wouldn't be able to spell. But anyway, I call it the reptilian brain. And we don't have that many emotions, because the reptilian brain, if we went back 1 million years in our evolution, what was going to be important to us? The most important things were to stay alive. And that means protecting ourselves. It means finding shelter for ourselves from the elements. It means having food to eat, which we probably hunt for or scavenge for. And it means finding water that we can drink somehow. 1 million years ago, that would be more than enough to be getting on with. So in those days, we didn't have much time for 70,000 thoughts. We needed a lot less of those, but when we had them, they had to be really spot on. Those thoughts had to hit our sweet spot. Those thoughts had to put us in what some people now call the zone. And athletes talk about the zone, and it's this place that they can get into on their own or with coaching. And you'll have noticed it at some time, doing something as well, where the world does become quiet. The mind does become still. We are not conscious of other people watching us. We're definitely not conscious of other people judging us. We're not conscious of the passage of time. In fact, it can be embarrassing, because if you have a deadline or something you have to do, if you get caught up in one of these flow activities, you'll miss that appointment. And it happened to me a few weeks ago. I was waiting for an appointment, and I thought I'd go into the National Gallery in London and look at some of the pictures. Before I knew it, I had 10 minutes to get somewhere that needed 20. I did get there in time, but I had to run. I couldn't speak for about an hour afterwards. So the kind of thoughts that come from our reptilian brain, they are emotions of, we only have 6 apparently. Well, we have more, but the big ones are disgust. I've got them written down here. Forgive me if I look at them and remind myself. Anger, shock, joy, sadness, contempt. And the big one we've mentioned before is fear. So these emotions are the ones that will be producing a lot of the thoughts in our unconscious mind. And sooner or later, these thoughts will pass through the filters and get into our conscious mind. Now, our conscious mind is not going to say stuff like, I don't like that man sitting opposite me on the train. I think he's about to kill me. So before he does that, I think I'd better kill him. We're not likely to say that, because we do have the conscious mind, the higher layers of thinking, which can analyze this information and start processing it and making it more acceptable to society and a more accurate reflection of the threats that we are facing. And the chances are that the person sitting opposite us on a train is not going to be a threat. They might be annoying when they're eating food noisily, or there are strong smells of food or something, but that's about as bad as it gets. The trouble is that this super analysis of those primitive emotions that rise up, they are huge shortcuts. They have to be, because we're getting thoughts that are unformed, and we're making them into something. We're creating them. We're creating thought from an emotion, and that can be a highly inaccurate creation, and particularly when it's related to fear, because we can all understand why we should be fearful. I mean, a degree of fear protects us. It makes us careful when we're driving or skiing or things like that. Some fear, some caution is a good thing to have. But people, particularly, it's not just children, by the way, continue to have fear for many of the activities that you do, that logically they will know is crazy, but they can't do anything about it. Or they don't, more correctly, they don't know how to do anything about it. And in its most extreme form, this is a phobia, or even a syndrome called post-traumatic disorder. And the effects of that, well, and a phobia for that matter, can be crippling. So how do we stop our thoughts from getting into causing problems like that? Well, when I said less is more, you can see it's all settled down now, and I don't know whether I'm holding this the right way around, but the word that you can now see is love. And you weren't able to see this when everything was going round like that. And love is an important emotion. I think I probably mentioned that somewhere. And you are not going to be able to appreciate it for what to its fullest extent if you have too much thinking going on. But you see, just by knowing that these thoughts are going on, it seems to act as a kind of a brake. And if you can catch it, if you can catch a thought that is leading you in a direction that you don't want to go, you can let it sort of evaporate, metaphorically, just evaporate away. Or if that's difficult to do, then replace it with another thought. And if you're going to replace a thought with another thought, it has to be more powerful. And the way we make a thought more powerful is just like any good movie director will know. We make that thought bigger, we make it bolder, we make it closer to us, wider. We add a fantastic soundtrack to it. We have a feeling, an emotion that we attach to it. So again, it would be love, hopefully joy, things like curiosity. These are the things that movie directors do, because they're script writers, they generate simple thoughts. But those simple thoughts on their own would never make a movie. It needs a little bit of magic. And in our case, that we have the magic of our mind. And I've had another question come in, and it says, how can I get more luck? Well, I hope that I've answered some of those things already. And just to quickly recap, they're in my book on Amazon. If you don't want to buy the book, anybody who signs up for my newsletter, my blog, they can write an email to me and they get a free PDF copy. So there's no excuse for anybody not to know what those 7 secrets are and what I think about them. The other way that how else can you get lucky? The funny thing is, and this is where I go into the last chapter, which is magic. Just believing that you're lucky can have just a hugely disproportionate effect on the things that happen to you. And I talked at the beginning of this show about things that we believe that we call self-beliefs. We view them as a truth. Well, if something is good, like having good luck, then it doesn't matter whether we believe it or if we wrongly think that it's a truth. In fact, if we think of it as truth, that's great, because there seems to be something that happens once people make their line in the sand, once people write something down as a commitment that they're going to do, once people put their thoughts in a certain direction. Often it's as if by synchronicity, as Carl Jung would say, or serendipity, we attract exactly what we're looking for. And of course, sometimes we attract luck in a completely opposite direction, because when our mind is open, we see opportunities that ordinarily we wouldn't do. Just as when these thoughts settle down here, we see stuff that we hadn't seen before. And if our mind is obsessing about all of our day-to-day hustle and bustle and deadlines and plannings and worrying about the interview with the boss and all this kind of stuff, there could be an opportunity right out here, and we're blind to it. You know, people say this in their own words. They often say, do you know, I don't know why I hadn't seen it before. It seems obvious now. How did I miss it? Well, you know, don't beat yourself up over that kind of stuff. So, to the lady who wrote, "How can I get more luck?" There's just another example, and there are many, many more. And of course, they don't all need to work for you. Even if only one of them works for you, it's probably going to bring you a little more luck. And as I said again at the beginning, a little more luck can go a long way. Now, here we get in the last couple of minutes or so that we have into something that's very powerful. You see, I mentioned how thoughts surface, how emotions produce thoughts, and thoughts surface into the conscious mind. And if we can, at the same time of being aware of the most important of these thoughts, we can then do something more constructive with them. Now, Carl Jung wrote a very controversial but famous paper, and he developed his concept of the connected unconscious. I think that, yes, I may have got that title slightly wrong, but that's very roughly what it was. That we're all connected, that there is a universal consciousness that binds all people together. And he went as far as to say that even people who are no longer living, that they are part of this energy field or framework or network or whatever it is that we can tap into. Now, I don't know whether he's stretching the metaphor too far with that or not, but I do know that people in these kind of things, they start to get lucky. It's the collective unconscious. It's come to me now. That's what Carl Jung talked about. And I think people in the book, The Secret and Think and Grow Rich, they've talked about very similar things. Now, you don't have to believe that this collective unconscious that surrounds you comes from all these other people. Your brain is probably way powerful enough if you can explore the hidden parts and start to learn how to use those to achieve the same result. And scientists have studied things like extrasensory perception and things like that. And they are probably not extrasensory, those that exist. They actually are real intrasensory thoughts that we have. And a big part of what I teach people and what they get from watching my videos, from reading my book, from working with me personally, and I'm often asked this on radio shows in only one word, and what they get is intuition. So to answer the questions, how can I get more luck? Is there really such a thing as luck, or do you create luck? The one word is intuition, because this brain of yours, which is way more powerful than you understand, it will be telling you, it will actually be screaming at you sometimes. But if your mind is busy, your conscious mind is busy, it will not hear the message. And this, when we do hear it, when our mind is quiet enough, and that's the only time that we hear it, perhaps even when we're asleep, we dream about the answer. But when we are aware of our intuition, then the world gets a lot easier, and people will often say things, you know, my head was telling me one thing, but in my heart, I knew another thing. Or often people will say, in my gut, I had a gut feeling or a stomach feeling that this was the right thing to do. And if assuming that our mind is quiet when we had that thought, it probably is. And I work with a lot of professional poker players. I'm not a very good poker player myself, but they certainly are, which is the most important thing. But they in particular have had great benefit from developing their intuitive powers, because as you probably know in poker, it's not just a question of playing the cards, it's a question of reading the other person. And is this person bluffing you or not? And so often when I talk to the players, they will say, you know, my first thought was he was bluffing. But then I thought again, I looked at the cards, I did some more thinking, overthinking, and I decided that he wasn't. And you know, they know as soon as they've done it. But that's okay. That's how the way you learn stuff. So we've talked about quite a lot of things. We've skated over stuff. In Future Probe, these shows are going to be on every Thursday at the same time, and for as long as people want to watch them, and I will be doing them. Within about half an hour or so, the recording of this show will be available for all the people who signed up for it, so you can watch it at your leisure. I'll also get round to putting this on YouTube in the next day or two. So thanks for signing up for this week. Please come back next week. I welcome people posting questions in advance or during the show, and we will not run out of things to talk about. So not sure exactly what it will be. It'll be on luck next week, but there will be a reminder when I say which particular aspect of luck that I want to address in more detail. So until then, I wish you an incredibly lucky week with everything that you do. And just be careful, as always, because luck is infectious. So make sure the people who are close to you are very close to you so that they can be lucky too. Okay, thanks for listening. Goodbye.